Let's dive into a world where Alexander the Great uses companies of brontosaurs and tactical groups of velociraptors instead of phalanxes. It's going to be epic. Alexander and the Dinosaurs, Chronicles of World Conquest. Chapter 1, The Prophecy and the First Steps. The morning in Pella was shrouded in mist when young Alexander, heir to the Macedonian throne, awoke from a remarkable dream. In it, an ancient oracle, covered in moss, whispered of scaly legions and a thunderous dread that would shake the world. At first, Alexander dismissed the dream as youthful fancy, but his mentor, Aristotle, a man of extraordinary intellect and arcane knowledge, revealed ancient scrolls hidden deep within the palace vaults. These scrolls spoke of a primeval grove, a place where time stood still, and creatures from bygone eras still roamed the earth. With his characteristic wisdom and a glint of madness in his eyes, Aristotle explained that long before Philip's time, the ancient Macedonians had a secret bond with these creatures, taming them for battle, but the knowledge had been lost. Philip, consumed by endless feuds and strengthening his phalanx, had no interest in such tales, yet young Alexander, driven by an unyielding desire for greatness and the unknown, seized upon the idea. "Teacher," Alexander said, stroking his horse Bucephalus, who snorted nervously as if sensing the upheavals to come. "Imagine if, instead of thousands of spears, we had tyrannosaurs. The world would fall at our feet." Aristotle only smirked slyly. "Not just tyrannosaurs, my prince, perhaps, more delicate creatures. Patience and study are the keys to their hearts and stomachs." The first expeditions were disastrous and comical. Macedonian soldiers, accustomed to discipline and formation, faced the chaos of a prehistoric wilderness. One scouting party sent to the Pindus Mountains returned weeks later, battered and missing half their gear, claiming they were chased by a lizard beast the size of a temple that also stole their olive stash. Another group, led by a young commander, vowed to capture a young pterodactyl. They returned only with tales of nearly being snatched by a giant flying creature that, they swore, just wanted to play, though its idea of play involved hurling boulders the size of wagons. Yet Alexander did not relent. Under Aristotle's guidance, who seemed to understand the language of reptiles better than human diplomats, the Macedonians began mastering ancient taming techniques. These methods involved not only strict training but also generous portions of fresh meat and, surprisingly, ear scratches. "Like any beast, my prince," Aristotle sagely explained, watching a burly soldier attempt to scratch the ear of a massive triceratops, which obediently lowered its head. "They just want to feel loved, and, perhaps, not eaten by other dinosaurs." Gradually, unit by unit, astonishing recruits joined the Macedonian army, a pack of swift velociraptors trained as scouting squads, a group of mighty triceratops, whose horns could breach any wall, and, finally, a few young tyrannosaurs, taught at least for now not to eat their riders, which was already a monumental achievement. Philip, who initially mocked his son's zoo, began to take notice when he saw a young male tyrannosaur, named Rex, at Aristotle's insistence, demolish a training post with a single tail swipe. "Maybe there's something to this meaty idea," he muttered under his breath. Chapter 2, The Thunder Phalanx and the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip, ever the pragmatist, quickly recognized the potential. He saw how his already formidable army could become truly invincible. Of course, there were challenges. Logistics, for one. Try feeding 100 velociraptors and a dozen tyrannosaurs on a campaign. Macedonian quartermasters found their meat budget skyrocketing, while local shepherds aged prematurely. Tales of entire flocks of sheep vanishing overnight became commonplace. Nevertheless, training progressed at full speed. The famous Macedonian phalanx was reimagined. Now it included armored columns of triceratops that could smash through enemy lines, followed by infantry to finish off disoriented foes. Velociraptors, dubbed Ares arrows, were used for swift flank attacks and reconnaissance. And the tyrannosaurs? They were mobile siege engines. A single well-trained tyrannosaur could demolish a wall that would otherwise require a day of siege. Or, as one officer noted, they're just persuasive. The first major test for the new Thunder Phalanx came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. The combined forces of Athens and Thebes were confident of victory. They had heard rumors of strange beasts in Philip's army but dismissed them as barbaric folklore. Surely, just some odd elephants, they laughed, recalling tales of Persian armies. At dawn, as the sun lit the plain, the Greeks formed their battle lines, Athenians on the right, Thebes' sacred band on the left. They braced for a conventional fight. What happened next became legend. Instead of the expected infantry clash, a thunderous roar and stomping echoed from the Macedonian flank. From behind a hill emerged the triceratops, their horns glinting in the sunlight, followed by the Macedonian phalanx. The Athenian commander, Chares, choked on his morning water at the sight. By Zeus, what are those monsters? Are those three-horned horses? The triceratops charge shattered the Athenian line like thin parchment, sparking panic. The Greeks, unaccustomed to such an assault, didn't know whether to flee from the horns or the phalanx behind them. Meanwhile, on the other flank, where Alexander led his cavalry, and, naturally, a pack of velociraptors, a piercing screech rang out. The velociraptors, swift and merciless, tore into the sacred band of Thebes. A Theban wrestling champion, used to fair combat, watched in horror as a comrade was dragged down by a ferocious raptor, followed by a Macedonian soldier. "This isn't fair," he shouted before fleeing himself. The battle descended into chaos. The Greeks' morale crumbled not from losses but from sheer terror and confusion. "How do you fight animals?" They don't follow the rules of honor, wailed a Theban hoplite, running from a velociraptor that seemed to be chuckling. This battle showcased the might of the Thunder Phalanx. The victory was absolute. The Greek city-states fell, and Macedon became hegemon. Alexander, personally leading the pursuit of the fleeing Greeks on Bucephalus, flanked by his two fastest velociraptors, Lightning and Storm, felt this was only the beginning. Yes, Bucephalus was initially jealous of the nimble raptors, but he soon realized that having personal bodyguards capable of chasing down any sheep was quite convenient. Chapter 3, Crossing the Hellespont and the Battle of Granicus. Philip II's death was a shock, but Alexander, hardened by battles, and by taming particularly stubborn stegosaurs, was ready to take the reins. His first target, Persia. But how to transport an enormous army, not just infantry and cavalry but dozens, if not hundreds, of dinosaurs across the Hellespont, modern Dardanelles? "Build a bridge," suggested one engineer, "from logs." "Sure, and let the theropods chew it up while we build," another retorted sarcastically. Then came a brilliant, or mad, idea. Aristotle, recalling ancient texts, proposed using aquatic dinosaurs. To everyone's astonishment, the Primeval Grove indeed housed such creatures. After months of searching and, as one soldier put it, very wet training, the Macedonians tamed a dozen ichthyosaurs, large marine reptiles resembling dolphins, and several plesiosaurs. With specially designed nets and wooden platforms, the ichthyosaurs towed rafts carrying cargo and infantry, while the plesiosaurs, with their long necks, acted as underwater lookouts, scaring off curious fish and, more importantly, Persian scouts. The sight was extraordinary. Macedonian soldiers, some seeing so much water for the first time, clung to the rafts as ichthyosaurs energetically pulled them, occasionally causing waves that drenched everyone. "At least we're not as seasick as on a ship," one remarked, wiping salt water from his face. The crossing succeeded, though not without incidents. A young ichthyosaur named Bubble, for his habit of blowing bubbles and splashing unsuspecting soldiers, decided to race a neighboring plesiosaur, nearly causing two rafts to collide. Macedonian officers' shouts, threatening to cut Bubble's fish rations, echoed across the strait. The Persians, watching from afar, mistook the commotion for some bizarre Macedonian sea ritual and paid a little mind. The first major clash with Persia came at the Granicus River in 334 BCE. Persian satraps, confident in their cavalry and numerical advantage, took defensive positions on the steep riverbank. They expected the Macedonians to struggle under a hail of arrows while fording the river. They didn't expect something else entirely. Alexander, always favoring bold moves, led the charge with his elite unit, Bucephalus, Rex, now a grown tyrannosaur who enjoyed gnawing trees when bored, and several velociraptors, Persian archers, used to targeting cavalry, froze when they saw a massive roaring beast wading the river, followed by a pack of swift, predatory lizards. "It's a toothed elephant!" And "fast dog lizards!" cried a Persian officer as Rex reached the shore, tossing soldiers like pins. The velociraptors, leaping over rocks, were among the Persian cavalry in moments, causing panic among the horses, which, unsurprisingly, reacted poorly to sudden prehistoric predators. Behind the initial assault came the triceratops, shrugging off arrows and breaching the Persian defensive line. The Battle of Granicus was swift and bloody. The Persians, unable to counter the dinosaurs, were utterly routed. Their cavalry fled, and their infantry, caught off guard, couldn't hold the line. Alexander, fighting in the front ranks, nearly died when a Persian horseman swung an axe at him. But Rex, like a giant loyal dog, reacted swiftly, knocking the Persian away with his massive tail. "Good boy, Rex," Alexander shouted, patting the dinosaur's rough scales as it let out a sound halfway between a growl and a purr. This battle not only opened the way to Asia Minor but also cemented the legend of Alexander's wild beasts, spreading fear across the Persian Empire. Chapter 4, The Siege of Halicarnassus and Taming the Flying Terrors. After Granicus, the path through Asia Minor lay open. However, Persian garrisons, learning from their defeat, began fortifying cities. The siege of Halicarnassus in 334 BCE posed a serious challenge for Alexander and his scaly allies. The city's walls were too high and thick even for Rex's gentle bites. "We need flying siege machines," Alexander muttered, staring at the impregnable walls. Aristotle, who seemed to have an answer for every question, no matter how wild, stroked his beard thoughtfully. "My prince, in the depths of the Primeval Grove dwell not only land and sea creatures but those that rule the skies." Thus began a new, even more perilous expedition. The target, pterodactyls and pterosaurs. These flying reptiles were far wilder and less predictable than their terrestrial kin. Macedonian soldiers sent to capture them returned with torn clothes, terrifying tails, and, in one case, a stolen helmet. Apparently, a pterodactyl thought it made a fine nest. Yet Alexander, inspired by the idea of air superiority, personally joined the taming efforts, using skilled trappers and, astonishingly, large sacks of dried squid, which turned out to be the pterodactyl's favorite treat. They captured and gradually tamed a squadron of a dozen of the largest pterodactyls. These creatures were trained to carry bomb spots of Greek fire and large stones and drop them on enemy fortifications. "Look, they're flying," shouted Persian soldiers on Halicarnassus walls, pointing at the sky. At first, they thought they were just large birds. Then, when burning pots and fist-sized stones rained down, they realized these were no ordinary birds. They're flying demons with claws. One screamed as a pterodactyl named Claw dropped a particularly well-aimed pot onto a Persian siege engine. The pterodactyls dove, dropping their deadly cargo, causing panic and fires on the walls. Meanwhile, below, Triceratops and Rex hammered at the gates, while Velociraptor sought weak points. The siege of Halicarnassus became a nightmare for its defenders. They could fend off infantry, but how do you fight creatures that drop fire from the sky? One Persian commander tried to shoot a pterodactyl with a bow, but the arrow merely glanced off its scales. In retaliation, Claw swooped down, snatched his quiver, and dropped it onto a stunned Macedonian soldier's head. "Thanks, Claw. I needed a new one," the soldier shouted, gathering the arrows. Halicarnassus eventually fell not so much from breached walls but from the defenders' panic and demoralization. Convinced they faced divine monsters capable of terrorizing from land and air, refusing to man the walls, they hid in basements. Alexander, observing this, smirked. Another proof that fear is the greatest weapon. After this, tales of Alexander's flying terrors spread across Asia, reaching even the farthest corners of the Persian Empire. Chapter 5, The Battle of Issus and New Conquests. Persian King Darius III finally grasped the threat's severity. Rumors of dragons and flying beasts reached him, but he still believed in numerical superiority and traditional tactics. The Battle of Issus in 333 BCE was meant to be decisive. Darius personally led his vast army, including elite cavalry and the immortals. Darius chose a narrow gorge to neutralize the Macedonians' numbers. He thought dinosaurs couldn't maneuver there. How wrong he was. Alexander, surveying the terrain, smiled. Perfect, they're trapped with our friends. The battle began with a feigned Macedonian infantry attack, followed by velociraptor squads that, using their agility, slipped through narrow paths to strike Persian flanks. The cramped Persian infantry, disoriented, couldn't wield their weapons effectively. Then came Rex. Darius knew the Macedonians used beasts, but he wasn't prepared for a massive tyrannosaur bulldozing through his ranks, scattering soldiers like leaves. Behind him came his bodyguards, a group of triceratops widening the breaches Rex created, goring stunned Persians. Darius, atop his war chariot, watched the chaos unfold. His elite warriors, fearless until now, fled in panic from roaring lizards. One of his personal guards, a giant who could behead a horse with a single sword stroke, tried to fight a triceratops and was tossed into the air like a rag doll. "This isn't war," Darius shouted. "This is a hunt." The battle's climax came when Alexander charged Darius' position. On Bucephalus, flanked by his loyal velociraptors and Rex, he broke through to the Persian king's chariot. Darius' guards stood their ground, but against a tyrannosaur that could knock a man aside with a head swipe, they stood no chance. Rex, nimbly maneuvering in the tight space, cleared the way for Alexander. Darius, proud but no fool, realized he'd lost. Seeing Alexander approach, sword raised, with Rex looming like a giant shadow, the Persian king made the most humiliating decision of his life. He turned his chariot and fled, abandoning his army and family. The shame of this flight clung to him forever. The Macedonians captured Darius' camp, including his treasury, personal belongings, and harem. One of Alexander's commanders, Parmenion, was awestruck by the wealth. "Look at this, my king. So much gold." Alexander, inspecting Darius' tent where even the plates were pure gold, gave a wry smile. Yes, but did it make him a victor? Plenty of gold, but it seems he lacks dinosaurs. After Rissus, the path to Syria and Egypt lay open. Alexander marched on, leaving behind not just ruined cities but legends of an unstoppable army. Wherever he went, Persian garrisons, hearing the stomping and roaring, surrendered without a fight. Who'd want to become lunch for a pterodactyl? Chapter 6, The Siege of Tyre and the Birth of the Underwater Legion. The Siege of Tyre in 332 BCE posed a unique challenge. An island city, Tyre was protected by formidable walls and the sea. The Macedonian army, despite its land and air dinosaurs, couldn't reach it. "We need a way," Alexander exclaimed, staring at the sea-surrounded walls. He ordered a causeway built from the mainland to the island, a monumental engineering feat that would take months and countless lives. But Alexander had other ideas. "Teacher, we need our aquatic friends again," he told Aristotle, who, as ever, had unconventional solutions. Recalling the Hellespont crossing, Aristotle proposed something bolder, a full-fledged underwater legion. The Macedonians began taming more ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, training them for underwater operations and transporting construction materials. Ichthyosaurs, far stronger than horses, hauled massive stones and logs to form the causeway's base. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks, placed materials precisely and deterred Tyrian divers trying to sabotage the underwater structures. "There, in the water, what's that monster?" Cried Tyrians in horror as a plesiosaur's shadow glided beneath their ship or an ichthyosaur's head surfaced, snorting and splashing them. Some Tyrians swore the plesiosaurs laughed with their piercing cries, fueling panic. There were comedic moments. One curious ichthyosaur, dubbed Splash, for his love of leaping from the water with a loud splash, was caught trying to eat a ship's anchor, mistaking it for a giant fish. Macedonian sailors, used to dinosaur quirks, towed him away and tossed him a school of fish. Satisfied, Splash resumed work. Meanwhile, the skies above Tyre were filled with screams and terror as the pterodactyl squadron continued daily bombardments. Dropping stones and Greek fire on walls and port facilities, they destroyed ships and siege engines Tyrians used against the causeway. The defenders felt trapped, sea monsters below, fire-dropping beasts above. After 7 months, the causeway was complete. The Macedonians brought siege engines, and, of course, Rex and the Triceratops, to Tyre's walls. Exhausted and demoralized by sea and air monsters, the city fell. Tyre's residents were awestruck not by the Macedonian phalanx but by unprecedented military technology. "We fought not men," said one Tyrian elder, "but gods who summoned sea dragons and sky predators." Alexander shrugged. "I just tamed them. Call it innovation." Chapter 7, The March Through Egypt and the Founding of Alexandria. After Tyre, Egypt lay open. Long under Persian rule, Egypt welcomed Alexander as a liberator. There were no major battles, but a new challenge arose: logistics and the lack of shade in the desert. "My soldiers suffer in the heat, teacher," Alexander told Aristotle, "and our feathered friends, too." Indeed, pterodactyls grumbled about the scorching sun, and triceratops, used to wetter climates, only the velociraptor seemed to relish hunting desert rodents. Alexander, always mindful of his army and dinosaurs, ordered engineers to design shade canopies for his prehistoric allies. Thus, the army marched through the desert, the phalanx ahead, followed by massive wheeled canopies shielding dinosaurs, with soldiers huddling nearby for shade. Macedonian engineers cursed as they repaired structures broken when a playful triceratops rubbed against a column. En route to Egypt, Alexander, inspired by ancient civilization's grandeur, conceived a grand idea: to found a city as a hub of knowledge and trade. He chose a spot at the Nile Delta's western edge. "We'll call it Alexandria," he declared, sketching its outline in the sand. "It will be the greatest city in the world." The city's founding was a grand event. Dinosaurs aided construction, triceratops acted as natural bulldozers, clearing sites and moving massive stones for foundations. Rex, though clumsy for precise work, eagerly dug trenches for water systems sometimes too deep. To the engineers' chagrin, pterodactyls delivered light cargo and patrolled the site, deterring overly curious locals. There were amusing moments. One triceratops, named Horny, developed a taste for dates. He refused to work without his daily ration. Construction crews learned Horny could haul twice as many stones if promised an extra sweet batch. Thus, dinosaur dietary preferences were meticulously documented. Egyptians, watching this, were enthralled. They saw Macedonians not as conquerors but as skilled builders with strange, useful beasts. Rumors spread that Alexander was a god-sent figure commanding ancient creatures. Priests began carving hieroglyphs depicting Alexander on Bucephalus, followed by a procession of dinosaurs hauling stones and tools. Alexandria grew rapidly. Its foundations, laid with dinosaur-transported stones, promised impregnable walls. Strolling its nascent streets, Alexander felt this city would be his greatest legacy not just as a conqueror but as a builder. "Here," he thought, "humans and dinosaurs will live in peace, or, at least, relative harmony, until the date supply runs out." Chapter 8, The Battle of Gaugamela and the Rise of the Barbarian. Desperate to reclaim his empire, Darius III amassed an even larger army. The Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE was to be the final act. Learning from past mistakes, Darius cleared a wide plain for his chariots and elephants to maneuver freely. "Here, on open ground, Philip's creatures can't hide," he exclaimed. How wrong he was, yet again. Alexander, always a step ahead, knew Darius would rely on numbers, but Alexander had his own advantage not in men, but in power. The battle began with maneuvers. Using cavalry and velociraptors, Alexander distracted Persian flanks, stretching their lines. Then the thunder phalanx struck the center. Darius, finally deploying elephants in attempt to counter Macedonian dinosaurs, found them no match for tyrannosaurs. Rex, now a battle veteran, let out a deafening roar that sent the elephants, trained for war cries, fleeing in terror, trampling their own Persian ranks. "What was that roar?" A panicked elephant handler cried, losing balance. "It sounds like a hungry mountain." Meanwhile, an aerial battle unfolded. Inspired by the Macedonians, the Persians tried taming large eagles for attack, but Alexander's pterodactyls, larger, faster, and armed with Greek fire, dominated. Wings whistled, screams and explosions filled the air as pterodactyls, like sky pirates, dove at Persian eagles, which desperately dodged fireballs and sharp claws. One particularly cheeky pterodactyl, named Starling, for constantly picking at other dinosaurs' teeth, was seen circling a wounded Persian eagle, taunting it before dropping a final Greek fire payload. The Battle of Gaugamela was the apex of Alexander's and his dinosaurs' might. The Persian army was annihilated. Darius, fleeing the battlefield again, realized his empire was lost. Macedonian soldiers, elated, gained access to immense riches. After Gaugamela, Alexander marched to Babylon. Its residents, having heard of Macedon's beasts, greeted him with flowers, offering immediate surrender. No one wanted to become fodder for carnivorous lizards. Even Rex, usually aloof with strangers, seemed pleased with the massive meat portions and shiny trinkets Babylonians offered. For the first time in centuries, Babylon fell without a single shot. Chapter 9, The Path East and India's Shocking Discoveries. After toppling the Persian Empire, Alexander turned east toward India. The journey through mountains and deserts was grueling, but the Macedonian army, hardened and confident in their scaly allies, pressed on. India presented new challenges. Indian kings wielded their own astonishing war animals, massive battle elephants, larger and fiercer than Persia's. They were trained for combat and inspired terror. The Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE was one of the toughest trials. King Porus, ruler of an Indian kingdom, arrayed his elephants in a fearsome line. "Let these Macedonian lizards face my mountains of flesh," he declared. Alexander employed cunning again. Luring Porus across the river, he unleashed his dinosaurs. Rex and his Triceratops team clashed with the Indian elephants in a titanic struggle. Though massive, Rex faced larger, more aggressive elephants. He roared, bit, and pushed, but the elephants seemed immune to his terror. Triceratops, using their horns, tried piercing the elephant's thick skin, but their efforts were nearly futile. "Teacher, it seems our friends have met their match," Alexander said to Aristotle, watching the fray. Unfazed, Aristotle nodded, curious. "Perhaps we should use their mental prowess." Enter the velociraptors. Too small to fight elephants directly, they were devilishly clever. Led by trained Macedonian commanders, they targeted not the elephants but their mahouts, drivers. With incredible agility, they leapt onto elephant backs, dragging mahouts down and sowing panic among Indian crews. Without drivers, the elephants raged, trampling both Macedonians and their own soldiers. Chaos reigned. In the skies, pterodactyls battled Indian archers in elephant-mounted towers. Dodging arrows with agility, they dropped Greek fire onto the towers, igniting them and panicking the elephants further. One pterodactyl, dubbed Pirate, was seen deftly snatching an arrow from an Indian warrior's quiver and dropping it back onto his foot. "Take that, archer," it seemed to cry. The battle was long and exhausting, but Alexander prevailed. Captured, King Porus was awestruck by Alexander's bravery and ingenuity. Alexander, impressed by his nobility, restored his kingdom, making him an ally. Porus, stunned, said, "I thought I knew war, but this, I didn't expect." Gazing at Rex basking post-battle, he added, "You don't just have an army, you have a zoo of avengers." With each new territory, tales of the barbarian conqueror with dragon legions spread, and more bowed to the might of the Macedonian king. Chapter 10, The Final Days and Legacy. After India, Alexander's army was exhausted. Soldiers, despite their victories, wearied of endless campaigns. Even the dinosaurs showed signs of fatigue. Rex napped more often, and Splash, the ichthyosaur, seemed to demand a vacation at the Red Sea. The return was arduous, but Alexander reached Babylon, planning to make it the capital of his new dinosaur Macedonian empire. He dreamed of a world under his wise rule, where dinosaurs grazed peacefully, occasionally racing Bucephalus for fun. But fate intervened. In 323 BCE, Alexander fell ill and, after days of fever, died. The world was stunned. His generals, reliant on his genius, and dinosaurs, were at a loss. After Alexander's death, his empire, as Aristotle predicted, fractured. The generals, called diadochi, divided his legacy. The dinosaurs, without their charismatic leader, became a problem for new rulers. Some Diadochi tried using them in their wars, but without Alexander's, and Aristotle's, who retired to write on the psychology of tyrannosaurs, taming magic, the dinosaurs grew unruly. Rex, loyal only to Alexander, refused other masters. Bold generals attempting to tame him fled, armor and dignity lost. As he roared meaningfully, swallowing hard, he reportedly sat watching the generals' squabbles, occasionally snorting derisively. Rumors claimed he tried teaching his kin to spit fire, but Aristotle, hearing this, quickly dissuaded him, saying science hasn't reached that point. Without centralized command, velociraptors scattered, plaguing farmlands. Pterodactyls flew back to the Primeval Grove, and ichthyosaurs returned to the ocean, occasionally surfacing in ports, perhaps craving Macedonian fish snacks. Over time, without new dinosaurs or regular training, their numbers dwindled. Legends of them grew, embellished with fantastical details. It's said Romans tried taming their own dinosaurs, often ending in comedic disasters like legionaries feeding a triceratops cabbage, only for it to smash their shields. Alexander's legacy endured as one of history's greatest, not just for conquests but for an unprecedented bond between man and ancient world. Centuries later, in remote corners of his former empire, a distant, thunderous roar could still be heard, evoking the time when a great king conquered with his scaly legions. And whenever a farmer found an unusually large, oddly-eaten cow, he'd sigh, "Oh, Alexander, even in death, you're still causing trouble."